When it comes to disclosure after infidelity, there comes a point when more answers actually are a problem rather than a benefit. There's the possibility of actually knowing far too much. Understandably, the knowledge of what happened in an affair is critical in being able to move forward. But once you've got enough information, once you can figure out what happened and you wrapped your mind around it, why do people continue to ask questions? Many times it's fear. We only want more answers because we just want to know the last date and time when we were made a fool of. Is it even worse than we thought? Sometimes it's just a false sense of safety. It feels like as long as your mate continues to answer the questions that you're asking, somehow you're going to be safe. But there comes a point when getting information in more detail as they answer questions becomes quite destructive. And oftentimes, the reason people continue asking questions when they've already got enough is they just keep thinking that enough information will somehow help this to make sense. That if they just see more and more and more, that they'll be able to wrap their mind around it. But in reality, you'll never be able to fully understand what's happened. And at some point, you have to accept that maybe you're only going to be able to understand it at about 80%, because there'll never be a good enough answer to justify what the other person's done. And that's what you ultimately have to accept. In Cindy Bill's book, Healing Your Marriage, When Trust is Broken, she gives an interesting example that she and her husband went through. One day she had, once again, another question, and she just asked that question, and her husband looked at her, and I'll just read kind of how the story went. He grabbed her hand and he just said, "Babe, I'll answer any question you ask for the rest of my life. But will my answer make you feel any better?" And that one thought really caught her. And she realized that he was right. The answer wouldn't make her feel any better. The only thing it would do is tell her the date and time that she was last made a fool of. But it wasn't going to help her feel any better. And sometimes 70 or 80%, once you begin to get the view of what is, all of those additional answers, they don't make you feel better, they only hurt. There comes a point in recovery, honestly, where you need to stop asking questions and accept that you have enough to begin to move forward. You have to accept that you'll never be able to fully understand why your mate did what they did. You may only understand it 70% or 80%, but you're not them. And so you have to accept that at least they're trying. And if you can see their heart and you know they're trying to give the answer, eventually you have to accept enough is enough. If your mate isn't answering your questions and you're still trying to understand what happened, that's one thing. But if your mate is answering your questions, then I believe after about 6 weeks, when curiosity begins to knock on the door about more detail, especially if your mate's tried hard to spill everything to you, you need to begin to ask yourself one of two questions. First, why do I need to know? Oftentimes, it's pride. As I mentioned, they're still looking for the next date and time when they were made the fool of. Even though they may have already gotten the information about that incident, they keep looking for more and more detail. But it's not something that really helps them feel any better. The second question that you need to be able to ask yourself is, will it help me heal? Far too often, the answer to that question is no. All the answer does, again, once you've gotten enough information where you see the picture, all it's going to do is add to your hurt. At some point, more information stops being helpful and it does become destructive. It doesn't really add to your understanding of the picture. It only keeps you stuck rotating in the first stage of recovery, which is that realization stage, that understanding stage. To move forward, you have to finally close out that stage so you can move into the next stage of ultimately releasing and moving forward from there. There's a third problem with continuing to get information. One of the things I always say is you never want to ask a question that allows you to paint a picture in your head. That comparison questions will not be helpful in any way, shape, form, or fashion. And yet, when it comes to those questions of, am I adequate, am I not adequate, those are probably the most difficult questions not to ask. However, questions that deal with what your mate said to the other person, any type of sexual positions, what you liked about her rather than me or him, or any of that stuff where you could paint a picture of exactly what's happening, those are harmful in the sense that those are the answers that create intrusive thoughts in your mind. It's not that you can't get over intrusive thoughts. However, it's going to make the recovery process much more difficult. Understandably, comparison questions are probably the ones that draw us the most because, again, we want to see our own inadequacy, our own lack of whatever. But if you can resist those questions, the comparison questions, and keep asking yourself, why do I need to know this information? Really, what good's it going to do? Will it help me move forward, or will it keep me stuck? That's an important answer, because ultimately, will those answers help you heal? So when it comes to disclosure, I just invite you to consider the possibility that less really is more. You may understand it as well as you can understand it. And continuing being stuck in the process of just asking questions, staying in disclosure for months, doesn't facilitate your healing, nor does it help you move forward, whether or not you stay in your marriage. So I just hope, as you move forward, you'll begin to ask those two questions and see if there's a way that you can finally decide it's time, I've got enough, so that you can move forward.